When do you think all the restrictions can be removed in schools and during school activities like the ones that we've been participating in for Duke of Edinburgh? Will wearing face masks, social distancing be here for a long time in order to keep us all safe?
So I think we're almost there, Ruben. That's the really good news. You'll know that in the winter period of last year, we applied some additional protective measures to schools because of Omicron, the wave that we're just coming through now. Those were taken away last month, earlier this month. And we've also made the decision, our Scottish Government has, with the advice from an advisory subgroup that I chair, that face coverings will no longer be required, which I'm sure you're delighted with, in secondary school classrooms. And I think we tried to lift those in the past, last October, but we were just heading into a period of infection and that was paused. So I think that's reasonable. And as you know, that change has been made elsewhere in the UK. So what you're left with now is a basket of pretty modest restrictions or measures. The remaining questions for me are face coverings on transport. I think if we continue to require them in busy transport in the general society, you might see that for school transport as well. And there may be face coverings moving around the building, although I'm not sure about that. But I am conscious that with Duke of Edinburgh, where you've got a whole suite of incredibly valuable activities, those have been impacted. And I think you'll see most of that ease soon. We really are in a very good place in Scotland at the moment. We've made huge progress, and there's absolutely no reason from my perspective why young people should face any limitations in their activities due to the pandemic, given where we are now. In the future, we might have a new variant or an upsurge that we need to worry about, but there aren't any signs of that currently.
Hi, Linda. My name's Lana.
Hi, Lana.
So during the first lockdown, the weather was good and our PE teacher gave us lots of outdoor activities to try. This helped shape our aim for the expedition within DofE to promote the outdoor activities on the island. After the second lockdown, the school organised an Around the Island charity walk in memory of a young man of an ex-pupil who died during due to mental health issues. The second lockdown in winter seemed to cause more mental health issues. What was it about the lockdown that seems to have created such a lot of young people needing to access mental health?
So Lana, I think you've maybe highlighted one of the issues that concerns me the most. And I have personal experience of this with a daughter and a son in their late teens. And my eldest, ended school in March 2020 in 6th year with a couple of days notice, and then really couldn't do whatever he wanted to do in what was going to be a gap year. And then my younger child, 2 exam years really disrupted. So I see the impact that has on young people, even though my circumstances are different from other people. And I think mental health is one of the things that's probably going to be the biggest thing that we need to be aware of and concerned about for the future. So back to your specific question, one of the things we know from behavioral research, which is something I've done over many years, is what we call cumulative impacts of adverse events, whether that be warfare, crisis, deprivation, other things. The longer they go on, the more difficult it is. So what we saw in the data was the second lockdown, or having another set of restrictions in a winter period, really hit a lot of people quite hard. So even you had a bit of a reprieve in the summer, didn't you? And then things got worse again. So I think those people who were already challenged or struggling will have found that particularly tough. And that even comes through in the public opinion polling. So I think looking ahead, we need to recognize that we're humans, we're social beings, and we need others, and we need interacting with others and activities to keep us going, particularly in our more formative younger years. What we call micro contacts, which is contacts between humans that are really everyday but involve us just seeing more people, are particularly important for young people as they grow and develop. And when you take those away, some people can become very isolated. So I think education, and that includes further and higher education, really need to take this stuff seriously and give people adequate support. And if you've got friends or family who are struggling, it's our responsibility to look out for them. But as I say, in terms of DofE, I know that around the country, local authorities have taken different approaches to what they can allow in outdoors or indoors. And I'm really hoping that we'll get to a steady state nationally, and all of these things will be able to go ahead without any problems.
How do you feel DofE could help improve mental health of young people?
What DofE provides is a community and a network to engage with others and connect, including those you wouldn't necessarily normally be in a classroom with or in your social group. So I think it has an important role to play. And I think particularly as we look ahead, it could be really vital for lots of young people who have felt lonely and isolated. And so I hope that DV can continue to do the excellent work it does. And I mean, Duke of Edinburgh is a fantastic program. I know that it helps you develop a lot of skills that you probably have anyway, but they really bring them to the fore. You learn about teamwork, you learn about planning, you learn about tough situations where you can get very tired and how you can pull together and get through that. It improves your fitness. And also there's the really strong volunteering aspect of DV, which I'm sure most of, or all of you have engaged in. And then you're giving back to your community. And those are things you can carry with you through life. And finally, they're also really important for employers and further in higher education to see that you've done that, because it just shows it's a real accomplishment. So I'm hoping that we can get back to normal. One thing I would say though about providers that you might be engaging with around Duke of Edinburgh, those that are giving different services or helping the program to organize things, they've also been impacted by the pandemic. They might have had staffing problems, they might have changed their business, there might have been other decisions they had to take. There might be facilities which have been scaled down. I think it might take a bit of time for those to get back on their feet. And I see that in the community learning sector, where we're training and teaching some of our younger people, or indeed adults who may be coming back into education. They've not yet got full access to all the facilities they had before the pandemic. And let's remember, the experience that you've had in these last 2 years is shared by millions of young people around the world. UNESCO has a fantastic website that shows you how young people have been affected on the school closures. For example, in Uganda, schools were closed for 18 months continuously. So as you go through your life, you'll all be looking back on this pandemic and have a shared experience. Doesn't really matter where you were in the world, with a few exceptions. So I think DV and schools, etc., can really help people to talk about things and cope with those issues.
Do you think there will be restrictions during the exam period? If so, will they affect the students or the invigilators?
So I'm really hoping, Ronnie, that will not be the case. We've had you're into your third academic year of disruption. We've had 2 exam diets badly affected. And the hope from the SQA and from all of us working in the sector is that they will go ahead. You've already seen some changes from the SQA in terms of the exam diet. So there are some courses which have slightly been scaled back, or there's a different approach to some of the assessments. But for most exams, I think you'll be able to, you'll be delighted with this, you'll highly likely to be able to be in a auditorium or somewhere, or a classroom with invigilators sitting your exams, and you shouldn't have to wear face coverings if things proceed as they are, because I was worried about pupils wearing face coverings during the exam period, and that just adding to the stress. So fingers crossed that it'll go ahead. Final point from me on this is, exams are not the only form of assessment. Continuous assessment is really something we need to do more of in Scottish schools. But as you look ahead to going to university or college, or even training, etc., having the experience of sitting an exam in under controlled conditions is something that's quite important to learn about, because you might have to do it in other settings.
Do you think the guidelines issued around restrictions have been clear enough?
Probably not, even though I've been involved in developing some of them more recently. One of the challenges in the UK is that we are 4 nations, but public health and healthcare has devolved, and governments have had their own autonomy to make decisions and to set guidelines and regulations, as in the law. And that means that we've had different approaches. So the debate at the moment that one of the items in the news recently has been the kind of headlines around self-isolation will no longer be required. But what the nuance behind that is that it was a legal requirement in England to self-isolate. And if you didn't do that when you were contacted by Test and Trace, you could be fined quite heavily. In Scotland, it was never a legal requirement to self-isolate, or indeed in Northern Ireland, it was guidance, very strong guidance, except for international travel, where certain times in the pandemic, isolation was part of law. And that I don't think has been understood. So I think the 4 nations differences have caused confusion. The other thing that I think was really challenging, and I don't know what your view is on this during the pandemic, was the levels framework that we had. That was applied in Scotland. And believe me, my colleagues in the Scottish Government involved in developing that and then discussing it with local authorities will tell you how complicated that was. So why could you go to a pub outdoors in one local authority, but it was shut in the next, or Why could people have more people in an area than other things? So I think that was tricky, and I think that led to some confusion. So if we were to do this all again, I think we might need to be a little bit more straightforward and a little clearer. The media has been a kind of good and a bad force during this pandemic. When you work with the media, you learn quite quickly that they like a big story, a controversial story. And that means sometimes making things look like they're black and white when they're not, as you all know. And so young people, I think at various stages in the pandemic have been painted as the people not following the rules, maybe having a house party or a rave or not wearing their face coverings or whatever. But if you dig into the data, that's not the case. There was a really good study of university students, and there's also polling like the COVID-19 social study that my colleagues do in London, that's across the UK. Young people were just as likely to try and follow guidelines. So they shouldn't be blamed because it's not accurate. But in terms of engaging with young people, I think organizations like Young Scot, I'm sure Duke of Edinburgh and others have provided a forum for young people to talk about what's happening and also contribute their views. We have a Scottish Youth Parliament, we have citizens' juries that we use that young people are on, and they've really had their say around that. And again, back to the advisory groups that I chair, we've heard from young people at various points in terms of their views. Like any public health campaign or regulation or issue, unless you actually engage with the groups that are affected, you can't achieve change. And so that's another lesson for the future that we can apply to many topics, whether it be climate change, transport, what we do about food poverty.
Been really sad to be able to see people as much as I would have liked to, because my grandparents both live in England and Ireland, so not being able to see them properly for the last 2 years.
Yeah, so that's the worst thing. And what about the best thing?
I've been able to just go and spend more time by myself, so able to go on big walks or whatever.
Yeah, the kind of calmness of the empty streets and the opportunity to have some reflective time.
I think my worst thing was kind of switching between the households. Like staying at my dad's and my mum's was kind of like a big thing, trying to work out, especially in the middle of the pandemic, where I should go on what days, just because of how bad it was, and we weren't sure if we were allowed to or if we weren't allowed to. The best thing was probably actually spending time with my sister who's closer to my age, because we never used to be that close, but then during the pandemic we got closer just because we were literally stuck in the same house.
The worst bit was probably our family normally goes on a month-long holiday to America every summer, but we weren't able to do that with the lockdown. The best bit was probably just getting a break from school and everything, really. So that,
Yeah,
didn't have as much stress as what I normally would have.